Okay, so to start, I'm just going to show you how I've laid out my palette and tell you which pigments I'm using, because there's many different pigments of each color on the color wheel. And you can definitely get very overwhelmed, spend way more money than you need to, etc., trying to get the full range, when in reality you can mix basically that whole range by using a few colors. So this is the palette that I have found to be the most versatile, representing only the primary and secondary colors on the color wheel. So to start, obviously we have white and black. For white, I am using titanium zinc white. I'm not sure if you can see that. I tend to think this is my favorite white to use because it is not, we'll be talking about warm and cool. This white is not too warm or too cool, and it has a very strong mixing power. Like when I mix it with another color, that color will definitely invariably, become much lighter immediately, but it's not so overpowering. Plain titanium white, I've had issues with it being too strong and taking a color too quickly to being very light in a way that is hard to reverse. And then flake white, which is a warm white, that's illegal. I think actually is illegal now, and it's a flake white replacement that they use, but that's because the flake is lead. But that's a warm white that is very beautiful, but doesn't really alter colors significantly enough, I don't think, when you mix it. So I think titanium zinc white is kind of a good middle ground. And I like to put my white at the bottom left corner of my palette. That's just a personal preference, but I like to keep whites and blacks at the corner just as sort of like almost anchors, but because they're just sort of, they're colors that are more for mixing than for using on their own. So I like to just have them in a very easily accessible, very visible place that I just don't even have to think about where they are. Black, you can actually mix black yourself in a variety of ways, which I can talk about in a separate lesson. But if you are wanting to just save yourself the time or already have it on hand and want to work straight from the tube, again, I keep my black on the bottom right corner. The black that I have here, this is really hard to see in this tube, is incredibly janky. It's really old. I honestly don't use black that much. But this black is called ivory black, and I use this for I choose this pigment for the same reason that I choose this white. It's kind of not too warm, not too cool, and it has kind of the right middle ground of power when mixing. So those are my black and white, and then so these are, as we discussed, the three primary colors. For yellow, I am using cadmium yellow light. And so these are the same pigments that I used in the values mixing video. Cadmium yellow light, I think, really with any of these colors, I chose them because they're sort of a good middle ground and because they just react pretty predictably when you mix them. So I have cadmium yellow light here, cadmium red light for our red, and ultramarine blue for our blue. So honestly, I could just use these paints to mix the full color wheel, mix all the secondary colors, mix all the tertiary colors using these, but both for the sake of time and because for only the purposes of mixing, I want to know exactly what to expect with the colors I'm going to be working with. I am just going to use colors out of the tube. So for orange, oh my God, this is just like not even visible. This is cadmium orange. And so I like to put my colors, I like to organize them in a way that is the same way that the color wheel is organized, right? I put my orange between my yellow and my red because it is the step between them on the color wheel, right? It's what you get when you mix the two of them. And if and when I mix a red orange, I would put that here. When I mix a yellow orange, I'll put that here. I want there to be a spectrum shown that makes sense. That you can sort of look at this as being like a map or like a piano. You can see where you are at any given point by looking at what's immediately on either side of you. So, so that's another just sort of pointer on how I arrange my palette. For purple, I'm using Winsor Violet. And this is another color that I basically never use. And the reason that I don't really use this orange or this purple is because you can mix I think what you find when you mix secondary colors is basically always more exciting than what you get when you pour it out of the tube. But again, this is kind of giving us the most predictable outcomes for the purposes of mixing. So that's Winsor Violet. And then for greens I do sometimes, use out of the tube or use mixtures with. This is cadmium green, and I'm using a lot of cadmiums in this palette. A lot of people don't like them because their cadmiums are toxic. Doesn't bother me, but so I am going to put that here to be between my blue and my yellow. And so this is, these are the basic, these are the fundamental triads on the color wheel. And so from here, we're going to look at how complements work together to create different levels of saturation or brightness in a color. And we're also going to look at temperature and how mixing certain colors together will create a color with a higher sense of warmth, whereas mixing other colors will create, a color that has more of a sense of being cold. So I will meet you there in a second. So first let's talk about temperature. So like we discussed, red is the warmest color on the color wheel. Blue is the coldest color on the color wheel. And these, that's as simple as it sounds. I think it's just that, red instinctively reminds us of fire, blue instinctively reminds us of water or ice or snow or whatever. And therefore, red tends to be called a warm color, blue tends to be called a cool color. Yellow is kind of in the middle. Yellow tends to vary a little bit more based on what it's mixed with. So I want to first show you how we can make a color warmer or cooler by mixing it with something that is closer to red or blue, or really just by being able to look at two colors next to one another and determining which of the two of these is warmer. So to start, actually, since yellow is kind of in the middle, it's probably a good one to work with. So first, we're going to make this yellow warmer. Okay, so in the middle, we have our true yellow, and that's just kind of solidly like not hot, not cold. It's like, you know, the equivalent of a nice spring day. And, but so I want to make this warmer. So I'll put some more yellow here. And then I'll actually, that's a lot. So I'm going to put the yellow that I'm going to mix with a blue on the other side. And I'm going to start by just adding a little bit of red to this and seeing what happens. So first of all, we can see this becoming orange, right? This is basically becoming a yellow orange, which would be one of our tertiary colors, right? On the color wheel, it would be here. And already we can see, okay, this is warmer than this, but I'll make it even more visible. So now this is actually pretty close to our cadmium orange. And so that's a good example of the fact that you really don't need secondary colors out of the tube to mix them. Even purple can be hard to mix from just red and blue, but it can be done. Okay, so again, so this is probably a little more red. This is, you know, very close to this orange. We can see if we were literally just trying to represent heat, like on a map or something, or on a thermometer, this would be closer to the high end of the temperature spectrum, right? Whereas this would be closer, this would be lower down that thermometer. And just to make sure that this is even more different from our orange, I'm going to add still more red. And so now we have a red orange, okay? That's going to be on our color wheel. That's going to be in between this true orange and this true red. So again, if we're using the thermometer analogy, the hottest, scariest, most intense point on our thermometer, if we're talking about, like, you know, looking at how hot is today going to get in the middle of summer, this is probably going to be telling us this is the peak of the day. This is probably going to be telling us we're getting close to that, but we're still not quite there. This is going to be telling us we're good for right now. So that is an example of warming a color up by mixing it with red. And now you can also see, you know, what happens if I mix this orange with yellow. I'll put this again so I don't want to waste it. And so this, because I haven't used it in so long, you can see all the linseed oil that's binding it together is just like leaking all around. So that's not visually great, but it's okay. So now when we mix that orange with yellow, we get this really beautiful, like, marigold yellow orange. And so this is a good example of how color temperature is relative. Okay, any color that's warm is only warmer than whatever it's next to. Okay, so like, for example, this yellow orange, I'll flatten this out on my knife. This yellow orange is for sure warmer than this yellow, right? It's closer to flame. It's a higher level of threat, whatever. But it's cooler than this red orange. It's not as intense. It's not as loud of an alarm call. And it's definitely a lot cooler than our true red. Okay, so this is showing us how even if a color is warm or cool kind of objectively, like red is the only colors that really are objectively warm and cool basically are red and blue. And even within red and blue, there are warm reds and cool reds, warm blues and cool blues. So temperature is always relative. Color temperature is always relative to whatever colors are surrounding. In terms of cool colors, so I'll pause this and come back with a cleaned up palette actually. Okay, so next thing we're going to look at, so in the mixing demo just now, we looked at warming a color up, right, using yellow as our neutral base. So we mixed this cadmium yellow light little by little with more and more cadmium red light, and that showed us a range of warm colors that we can get from mixing one color with another color that is warmer than the first one. And so, and we also saw with that these colors not only, first of all, look similar to this orange, like they kind of just look like tweaked versions of this orange, which to me shows that we don't really need our secondary colors to come from the tube. We can just as easily mix them ourselves. But we also see that we have mixed two of the tertiary colors, right? We have a yellow orange and a red orange. And the analogy that I was using to kind of evaluate how warm they are in relation to one another is to think about this like if you were to see a diagram of a thermometer, right? The yellow is probably not going to indicate the hottest temperature on the thermometer. If it's the middle of summer, you're looking at, you know, a diagram of how hot is the hottest point of summer going to be. That day is going to be marked with this color. It's not going to be marked with this. You know, this is like maybe showing things are about to start climbing, but it's not going to be the peak, okay? And any colors between here and there are somewhere along that spectrum of warmth. So now the same principle, but in reverse, we're going to look at cooling a color down by mixing it with blue, although obviously you can also cool a color down by mixing it with anything that is closer to blue than your first color is. So, so again, we're starting with cadmium yellow light. And so I am going to be mixing it, just making sure my shadow isn't in the way the light has changed since I started recording this. So it's a little bit hard for me to do it without a shadow. So we have our cadmium yellow light, and then I'm going to start mixing in some ultramarine blue. And so this is giving us this kind of like mossy green. And so is this cooler than this? Is this green cooler than this yellow? Maybe a little bit. I don't really feel like it's dramatic enough yet to really be demonstrative, so I'm going to mix in a little bit more blue. And so this, I feel confident saying, you know, in part it's darker, which might be giving me the impression that it's cooler. Dark colors aren't necessarily cooler, but I think bright colors can tend to feel warmer because we associate them with light. But I feel comfortable saying, you know, again, I kind of tend to just make analogies to nature or to familiar metaphors when I'm trying to determine if something is warmer or cooler than whatever is next to it. The closer something is to a force that I associate with fire, whether it's actual fire, whether it's heat, whether it's an alarm, whether it's the sun, that's going to be warmer to me. I associate yellow with the sun, green more with the grass or with a lake or something like that. So I'm going to say that this yellow is a little bit warmer. Gotta get another paper towel. I know that that's maybe kind of a sloppy metaphor, but it's, you know, it's partially hard to describe because I think a lot of this is stuff that already intuitively makes sense when you see it. For me, what's hard isn't necessarily determining what's warm or cool, although sometimes that is hard. I actually tend to have a little bit of trouble even seeing cool colors. I think it's literally harder for my eyes to see them. So I'm gonna make something that's even cooler than this. This is probably kind of a yellow green, closer to yellow green than this, right? This is more of a true green. So now I'm gonna make something that's cooler than this one, that skews even more heavily towards blue. So this is going to be kind of a blue-green. Make sure my shadow's not in the way. And so this is a nice color, but it's still a little too similar to my blue, so I'm going to add a little more yellow. So this is where your second palette knife comes in handy to really make sure that you're using all the paint that you picked up. Okay. So this is kind of a dark blue-green. And so I can also say here that this color is reminding me less of light. It's reminding me less of warmth. It is closer to blue. It's a cooler color than this is. Again, I apologize for my imprecise language, but I hope visually it is clear. And so this shows us two things. Again, same as before. One, it shows yet another range of temperature that you can get just starting from one color. It also shows us, like, looking at all 6 of these colors together, that's a really wide range of colors that we've gotten just from using red, yellow, and blue. We have a super distinct colors, like colors that are very different from one another, colors that you could put them in a painting and I would feel convinced that they should be there. They're intentional. They have, they are found in nature. They're found in the imagination. And they're, you know, they're also just colors on the color wheel. We have yellow, orange, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, green. And so we've mixed that whole range just from 3 pigments. So that's just to reiterate, you really can get a lot from very few colors. And this is obviously only a fraction of, you know, as we saw in our value studies, I could mix a whole spectrum of this particular green from black to white, this particular green from black to white, you know, this orange from black to white. And as we'll see in a second, I can also vary the saturations for each of them. So that's kind of the beginning, you know, a very basic overview of talking about temperature and how temperature exists in and is seen in color.